And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another live Seattle Data Guy show. I've been doing one of these every day this week almost. So, I'm excited to have Joe jump on because he's starting to cause some fights in the data world. No, I don't think
Did
that's
I? I don't know. We'll get into that.
I don't think it's what it is. No, but I think you've said some things recently that spurred a lot of thinking that I've been trying to think about. So I wanted to kind of chat about that. So I don't think you need an intro, but you're welcome to give yourself some background.
I'm Joe, and I guess I cause fights. So
No, I don't think you actually cause fights. I think, but I feel like that last, it was like the field notes. It was more of, I think it causes discussions, which is good. I think that's what we need in the data world. Not everything needs to be marketing and AI's doing wonders and,
this
whatever else
wasn't
is going on.
a marketing thing. No, it wasn't any.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that actually intrigued me was the idea of like playing not to lose. Because as I'm trying to put together a book myself, I'm thinking about like projects and like what projects data teams should be taking on, what projects are actually worth taking on. And I like the idea of like thinking offensive versus defensive projects. So I'd love to kind of just dig in there and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, let me see. There's a notion of again playing not to lose, which is the title of last weekend's article. And that's very much coming from a place where I've just noticed over the years, data teams, and I've worked on these teams before too. The tendency is to play it safe, right? Just do the reporting, do what the data team stuff is you're supposed to be doing. But what I noticed is the business tends not to really care. I think after a very short while, because it's like a lot of IT functions, right? You're there to serve the purposes of the kind of the back office. And if you're stuck in the back office, I think it's really hard to get the business to pay attention, let alone to move the needle of the business. I think the article was coming from a place where I kept hearing, people talk about like, why can't I seem to get the business to care about what we do? We being the data team or the data initiative. And then the other part of that is, why can't we seem to get budget? Why are we getting, our team cut down? Why this, why that, why, so a lot of existential questions. And I started thinking about it a lot. And it's like, well, I think one cause, and it's one of probably a few, but definitely a big symptom of this is the data teams that play not to lose, right? But if you're playing not to lose, you're also playing not to win. And I think by more aligning yourself with the strategic initiatives of the business, helping drive the needle in terms of top line sales, reducing costs and so forth, this puts you very much in line with the goals of a business, really, which is to make a customer that you can repeatedly sell to, according to Peter Drucker, to paraphrase him. So that's kind of where I was coming from with this. I guess I just gotten kind of tired of hearing the same stuff over and over for a long time about data teams not being able to produce value and not seeming to have a quote seat at the table and and all these other things that you can read on LinkedIn every day. People complain about it, and I don't know. I guess I was in kind of a grumpy mood.
Well, I think we as data people like to complain. I think that's something we're very, very good at. You bring us all together in a conference, and at some point we'll have some therapy sessions.
I think here I'm complaining about complaining, right? That's kind of the irony of it.
So, it's very, very meta, very meta. But I imagine like that's kind of step one into trying to figure out, okay, but how do we fix it? Because it feels like this has been the state of the data world. I mean, far before I jumped in. I don't know how you feel like this, like, again, feeling like a second class citizen, feeling like we're always just having to say garbage in, garbage out, like feeling like we're having the same conversations over and over again, to like almost like a Groundhog Day effect. Does it feel like it's changed for you? Like, and yeah, does it feel like?
No. Let me ask you this. So, I mean, you worked at Facebook. I mean, did you feel like data teams were a second class citizen there versus like your other experiences?
Definitely, it was definitely a lot better. Obviously, in terms of pay, right? Like, if you're going to talk about, there's from like a internal standpoint, data teams were not considered engineering. So that was, I mean, like if you want to consider like second class citizens, obviously the top class citizen at Facebook is engineers.
Right.
And then like they have whatever their leveling is like E1, E2, and everyone else is just IC, right? Because we're all just normal
Interesting.
person. So that could be considered a little bit of a second class citizen. But other than that, like, yeah, I'd say you felt like people were wanting data, right? Like they wanted data for whatever they were doing. They wanted to track it. So I do think in that regard, data played a little more of a role. I think there are advantages that companies like Facebook or anything that's like digitally native have compared to businesses that are in real life, which is it's just so much easier to have all your data be integrated and standardized, and it's just an easier life compared to like
Yeah.
even some small companies I work at where they have like 8 or 12 plus different systems where I consult with, right? Like real life happens and it's like, well, the data gets created in system 1 and then it goes to system 2 and then someone manually updates it and it never actually gets back to system 1. So we have to take, system 2's data as like some part of the source of truth and then it goes into system 3 and then, just kind of goes from there.
Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that is interesting because I would figure out a place like Facebook or now Meta, right? The data is literally the product.
Yeah.
And so, and that's right. I think, but you contrast that against, I made another post about how most companies are Dunder Mifflin. And if you're trying to like, and if you're a vendor trying to sell these businesses or you're a data team in these businesses, just like, I think the challenge was that, try selling AI to Michael Scott back in, it's a different ball game versus Mark Zuckerberg, who I think, sort of gets it.
Yes.
But most of the businesses are still to this day, the businesses I see and love your feedback on this, is more like Dunder Mifflin. It's like legacy systems, old school practices, not really up to date on anything. The problem is, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but the challenge for data people is that a lot of these companies, they make good money, right? I mean, they're profitable.
Yeah.
They have, a successful customer, great customer base, successful businesses. And so I guess that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think is what I'm getting at, with a lot of these businesses, everyone, so the other part of it, one of my other rants this week was just about how, I don't think a lot of companies need data teams. What I mean by that is, if you look at like sort of the, the long tail of businesses in the United States, there's millions of them. I don't think a lot of them need data teams because they're not set up to, I think, be data literate, set a data team up for success, any number of factors that, would mean the data teams, not just needed, but welcome in the business, right? And so that's kind of where I was coming from. But then some people push back and say, well, every company needs a data team. And I was like, cool, let's do this thought experiment here. If we take just 20 companies, across any vertical, mix of verticals, maturity, sizes, whatever. And if the supposition is that every company needs a data team, every one of them, all 20, great. If by a certain period of time, all these data teams succeed in raising the revenue of the business, cutting costs, whatever KPI we can universally agree on, great. You get $100,000 for each successful business. So, 20 times $100,000, good money. However, if even one of them fails, you have to pay $100,000 out of your own pocket for that failed data team, right? And I don't think anyone's going to take that bet because the failure rates of these teams.
Yeah.
And that's just it. But I think it's this notion that everybody needs a data team. I think I was pushing back on, because I think you and I, in our consultancies, we see a lot of companies where there's varying levels of maturity, varying levels of, success with data. But I mean, it's sort of a bias as well, because we're brought in when things aren't going well. So there's that. But, I think that it's, yeah, we can get into more of that, but that was just an observation that I had where I felt like we're overweighting on this notion that like data teams are sort of the center of the universe, sort of a pre-Galileo kind of thinking. But
yeah.
yeah, so Yeah, there's all these conflict, things I've been just noticing, right? Like, playing not to lose. And I'm kind of like, well, fine. If we're just playing not to lose, and like, what is the point of a data team in general? Why can't that you just automate that for the most part, be done? I don't know. Just
Yeah.
random things I just notice and get peeved at and that kind of stuff.
Become another grumpy man yelling at the sky.
Yeah,
I
and
think
that's why I have LinkedIn now. So you're just
I think I often ask the same question because working as a consultant, you get brought in because things are a mess, right? Or that's a big reason you might either people are about to get started and don't want to create a mess, or they already have a mess and they just want to get started or get cleaned up.
like we
So
take a coffee.
I was just like, I don't know why my throat, but I I think that is something about, does every company need a data team? I think that brings up a good point where it's like, it's not to say that every company maybe can't benefit from having, some form of, whatever insights reporting. But yeah, do you need a full blown $150,000 plus data team that you're paying for, plus Snowflake, plus everything else? I think I wrote this in one of the chapters of the books that I'm trying to put together, where it's like, I say something like, you know, the business can benefit a lot more from arguably a really good operations manager than it could from like a data team, right? Because like if operations aren't going well, it doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter. And I think you brought this up somewhere too, where it's like the fact that your company can afford a data team means they're already successful, like they're already doing something well, right? Because they can suddenly invest $500,000 if they're hiring like 2 or 3 people plus all the technology into that area, which is a lot of money to invest, and then the question becomes, are you returning it back, right? Like, are you actually even
Yeah,
giving them that $500,000 back, or are you just costing them $500,000 and giving them some nice feelings? So
nice feelings. Yeah, I mean, you can buy vibes, uh, data vibes. I think it's an interesting question. Like, I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to a company. One of my friends like, oh, you should hire Joe. He's really good at doing, I think in this case, supply chain optimization, right? And so I meet this company. They're a very successful supplement company. They sell like pre-workouts. You'd know them if you saw them, right? I mean, their logos everywhere right now, and they blew up. They had no data team whatsoever. And even when I talked to them, they were able to sponsor like racetracks in Vegas and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you guys are making an ungodly amount of money. And they're kind of like, well, what do we need a data team for? I mean, we're doing pretty well. And I was like, yeah, I can't really argue with you on this,
yeah,
right? Like we can focus on optimizing certain things, but for the most part, like, you have a really good understanding of your customers, you know your brand, and you don't seem to have any stock outs when you're dealing with retailers, nor you do seem to be over inventoried. So like all the metrics of being, a thriving supplement company in both retail and direct to consumer makes you guys are just everything's firing. I don't know that you need these things. You certainly could, but so I think it's an example of like, because again, the CEO was like, well, yeah, but help me understand, like, why would I, what do I need to use you for?
yeah,
Like everything seems to be working, and I'm like, well, I mean, I'm not going to argue with you. If you think everything's working, then great. I mean, could you optimize, and make more money? I mean, absolutely. But I think the thinking of a lot of business owners is things are going just fine, and what do I need to optimize for, right? Like I can print money. I have 90% product margins. I don't need to. I mean, I can make a lot of mistakes at this point,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
good example.
what then? Where do you see like data engineers maybe doing like flipping on the other side? Where do you not data engineers? Where do you see data teams actually delivering? Where do you feel like you have seen data teams actually do something that has impacted the business?
I think when data is really part of the product, that's where it does really well, right? So like data has an end user goal,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I flip the question on its head, where do I see data teams fail? It's mainly when it's an internally facing IT function where you're just providing dashboards for the business, reports that nobody looks at. Like that's where I see these efforts sort of just fall by the wayside. 'Cause now it's one, you're a cost center. You're not producing any, verifiable or externally facing, ROI,
Mm.
right? Whereas if you're at Meta, for example, if I have one friend who, was a machine learning engineer there, and like the product he worked on literally was bringing in like I think $1 or $2 billion a year. Like that is a directly,
Yeah.
like and like he was, and he remember he commented like, I'm sure you know this at Meta, you're working a lot of hours every week, right? Like his whole thing is like, if this thing goes down, that's millions of dollars per minute that we're losing. Like I
Yeah.
can't just take it lightly. So in that case, like, yeah, I think in those cases, you just know to the T, like, what if you know if you're losing X millions per second or minute or whatever that it's down, then I think you kind of know your ROI. Right? But I think and that's where I see that data engineers and data teams are just really successful, is when it's tied directly to some sort of revenue generation. But where it fails is when you're just this opaque cost center. It's like, we spend our budget on quote IT, and I have no freaking idea, what happens, what I'm getting out of this, right? I'm getting reports, but what's the value of a report? And how do you establish metrics around that? Like, is it number of times it's opened, right? Like, what's the decision you're making off of it? So it kind of goes back to this old saying, what's the ROI of putting your socks on in the morning, right? It's like, I don't know, something there, but might not be either. Especially if you just wear Crocs all day. So.
Do you wear Crocs all day?
No comment.
Sorry,
No,
I don't know why I asked. I was like, it feels like Crocs have become a weird thing. The whole like everyone loves them, and then idiocracy, etc. So I was like, well, now I gotta know if Joe has joined the Crocs gang.
I wear them when I rock climb, actually. And here's
Okay.
why. Yeah, when I'm rock
Wait.
climbing.
So how is that? You don't wear rock climbing shoes?
Well, I wear them when I'm not wearing rock climbing shoes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that'd be really weird to climb in Crocs.
I'd be like, that's impressive if you. Anyways, I'll go off the Crocs line, but that's funny.
Well, they're a good example of a business, right? I mean, Crocs they were popular for a bit, died off, and now they're huge. I mean, they make billions a year.
Yeah.
Selling, overpriced rubber shoe sandals. And then Donald Parrish says Birkenstocks. I mean, I think the Birkenstocks went public, I think last year, which is kind of crazy. So they'd always been public, but different shoe preferences. But I mean, but you talk, if we take, for example, Birkenstocks and Crocs, right? And you relate it back to data, right? So I'm guessing these are, the data team that's going to help them, it's like data functions, right? So you're talking about, definitely supply chain, making sure you're able to source your materials and get the product made and so forth. That's a very data heavy situation. Like, and the number one thing you need there is a good forecast, right? When you're doing production, it's like the first thing a manufacturer is going to ask you is, what's your forecast? So they can go secure raw materials. Like literally the first thing they're going to ask. And that's going to be, so the forecast is always the lingua franca in your discussions. Like how over or under are we right now with expectations? Because that's how they're going to do capacity planning, ordering, everything else. Like, this is just day one. So that's very data driven, right? Like how you come up with the forecast is like, you could do it any number of ways. But that's, if you get that right, things work. If you get it wrong, your supply chain from source materials all the way to retailer, that suffers, right? And so you got to get that right. And of course, then you got to be able to think of, okay, so like what marketing campaigns are we doing based on the forecast? Like, what do we do to drive the demand?
Yeah.
So in that case, like for Birkenstocks and Crocs, I'm guessing that those are the aspects where you're very data driven. I don't think you could run that operation on vibes, right?
No.
But that's data that supports sort of the end consumer experience. It's like, I want to get Crocs, Birkenstocks off the shelf or off Amazon. Like, I want the color, I want the size. Like, where is it? I want it like same day delivery. Like, that means the product has to be there.
Yeah.
So then that to me is like, that's always supply chain and marketing has always been like the classic data driven stuff. But that helps the end, that helps drive the bottom line, right? But if you're talking like, here's reports on whatever stuff, that's sort of a different ball game, right? So I think that's how I differentiate these two.
I didn't hear any AI in there in that walkthrough of your your breakdown of how you'd imagine a company like Crocs or Birkenstock would use data.
Oh yeah, AI. Yeah, they need that for sure. No, I'm kidding. Like it's interesting because I think in supply chain, like the same forecasting algorithms have been around for many, many decades, either ARIMA models or some exponential smoothing forecast model. But it's those are just like weighted averages, basically. There's nothing fancy about it and correlating time points together. But it's not like you're talking AI. In fact, it's interesting. I think some friends of mine had done some comparisons with quote AI forecasting models versus the old school ones. And the old school ones just work. You can use them in Excel. They're not fancy. And they just kind of work. The AI ones, what they take forever to train. Even if they're better, they're only marginally better.
Yeah.
So, and because of the forecast, you're never going to be right anyway. Like you can literally not predict the future.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what's the ROI on that? But yeah, AI, yeah, they don't need it. Turns out.
Yeah, that makes me think. I remember probably like 5 years ago reading some articles comparing like neural network forecasting versus, again, same thing. And I think I want to say it was like the same result, where it was like, I mean, sure, it's maybe a little better, but honestly, like, is it worth the extra effort to put it in? So yeah, we keep trying to improve this thing that works like as well as it's going to, again, just other than supply chain shocks or something that's so big that everyone's going to be impacted anyways. So it's harder to guess. I've been kind of thinking similarly on like with Chili's turnaround. I'm like, where did Chili's probably use data in their turnaround? Like what would
Oh,
be it?
interesting. What happened there?
Oh, Chili. So right, because I don't know like when it started. I think the fact that other restaurants got so expensive, it just started to stand out even more. But basically, I think it started around two years ago. They started a turnaround effort. They did some things like invest like a few $100 million in like making their places nicer. They simplified their menu so that they didn't have as much like obviously overhead and things of that nature. And then they started putting more effort into marketing. And then it like all correlated with the fact that all the other restaurants like McDonald's costs like $15 for a meal for one person, and Chili's is like, we'll give you whatever. I don't know if it's like a drink, a meal, and a dessert or something. Some trio offer for like $10.99 for a sit down restaurant. So it's like, well, you could go to McDonald's and go get $15 meal, or you could just come to us. And so they kind of had it was like just all the right things at one time.
I had no idea. I guess it shows how tuned out I am into Chili's. I think I used to go there back in the day to get like their jalapeno poppers or whatever they had. But then they became like a really dingy place, right? It was kind of like, I think there were those memes on Instagram where it's like, here's me like, 4 margaritas in doing karaoke at a Chili's at 3 p.m. or something. So yeah, it's like screaming Nickelback at the top of your lungs. So I mean, that's just kind of I think the vibe. But that's interesting. It turned around. I guess yeah, it's data driven, right? I mean, I was reading an interview with the this young 30-something guy taking over Red Lobster. Same kind of turnaround thing. Like Red Lobster's, I think declared bankruptcy, but they had the endless shrimp fiasco that just sunk them to the point where I think their Thai investor was like, yeah, we're done. You guys are a junk show. So, but he's got a plan to turn it around. He seemed very numbers driven, and just very right by the book. I'm like, good luck to you, sir. You seem to have a good head on your shoulders. So,
was that an interview you did somewhere, or you just happened to where did you happen to meet?
No, somewhere I read, or it was a podcast.
Okay. I thought you I was like, did you talk?
No, I that would be a weird interview. I mean, I'd love to interview the CEO of Red Lobster. That'd be interesting. I mean, I nerd out on these business conversations a lot. Like I've always been a business nerd. So it sounds like you are too. You're studying the gory details of Chili's turnaround. So at first I thought you meant the country, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, I know. I'm not that like macro. I think on the business side, it's generally a little more interesting. I'm sure maybe as I get older, maybe I'll be interested in country turnarounds. But I do think there's something interesting about like business turnarounds or business success in general. It's like what makes a business succeed or fail. It would be, I think it'd be really cool to talk to people who were maybe either on the data team or the CEO and how they actually used data to be helpful in those situations. Because I think again, we see a lot of like CTOs and things of that nature. In fact, I think I was reading Nikhil just put out an article I think called The Pain Zone. He's
Yep.
the you interviewed him not that long ago. He put out an article recently called like The Pain Zone, and he referenced how like the CTO of this company was going and saying they were doing all this stuff, and he's like, we're not doing any of that stuff. And I think that like happens, like this like very beautiful world that someone paints, but I'd rather hear like, no, I want to hear like the nitty gritty. How did you turn around the company? Like, forget AI, like that doesn't matter. Like, how did you take a company that was struggling, that felt dingy, and make it into something that people wanted to go to? So
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to find this article there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like in my bookshelf there's a lot of business books, right? More stories about businesses too, like biographies of businesses and business owners. I think that's kind of a biography nut, but I think it's interesting to get into the backstory of why people, what influence the decisions that people make, right? And it's because it's one thing to read an article like in the Wall Street Journal about something. I think it's another thing to kind of understand the person,
yeah,
the people who kind of built a business and either led. And usually it's a great success, and then something happens and there's a downfall, and who knows where it goes after that. Sometimes they find resurrection for the most part. That's that, right? So it's
sounds like you're
it's
describing a
fascinating.
story. Sounds like you're describing like the human desire for story there. We love the. I think that was something I recently was again, like the more you, I don't know if it's like the more you get older, the more you try to get time to reflect, the more you like wonder why we do what we do. And then I think stories play a
Yeah.
role in that. And it's, I get that everyone wants to learn more about tech, but I'm like, yeah, but like how do the people, like how do we interact with it is probably more important than like learning whatever new technology is out there. So
Yeah, especially right now. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like if you take the approach of just learning every technology as it comes out, like that's going to be super exhausting, and you actually will never get there because there's not enough, literally not enough time in the day. But if you get the context right, I mean that's always fascinating to do. Sort of, I've taken a habit of just reading the old technology books, actually, like stuff that's probably decades old.
yeah,
I think you realize that there's a lot of themes that um, recur through our industry. People are writing about a lot of the same stuff that we're talking about now. Like, why is technology so hard? And all this stuff. I mean, it's these aren't new conversations. They've been happening for a while. Like I'm looking at one book. Um, a really good book here is Peopleware. I mean, I think this was first published in 1987, I believe. Wait, let's see here. Yeah, 87. It's the first one. But it just talks about, okay, productive projects and teams building software. If you
yeah,
were to read this book today, not a lot's changed. Like
yeah,
the essence of it is like still almost 100% relevant. I can't really find anything in this book where I'm like, that's irrelevant now. That's gone away.
yeah.
Right. Like nothing in the book would indicate that. Like, let me see. There's this chapter, Quality if Time Permits.
No. talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
tech debt, and like it's like what can you actually make?
Yeah.
How good can you actually make it? And that makes me think of like the Mythical Man month, because like I think that one's
Yeah.
like classic, just because it's like, yeah, you read it and you're like, so yeah, we're still dealing with these problems today.
Yeah.
we're still dealing with these exact same problems.
Still
And
doing it. Yeah.
you know, technology helps remove a lot of the technical friction, and so yeah, maybe it's easier to process lots of data, but if we still don't, if the data is whatever, again, the data is still bad, or if we still have hard times figuring out how to interact with the business, or even complete a project on time, or complete a project at all, it doesn't really matter. We just kind of keep going in cycles. So again, the Groundhog Day of the data world. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that
but the interesting thing now is, it's there's always some catalyst that pushes technology back to the forefront of executives' minds, right?
yeah,
So back in the 80s, it was, the PC revolution. digitizing your business, right? So digital transformation was popular through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I mean, if you haven't digitally transformed your business by now, you probably aren't going to do it. You're probably
Yeah.
like a cattle rancher or something, which perfectly fine. But that was, but now then it was like big data, right? And then now it's AI, and we've gone through like several like micro hype cycles with AI. But I think because of the consumerization of stuff like ChatGPT, like now it's a consumer product. It's not just um, like deep learning. I think that was when that became popular in the 2010s, sort of the early mid 2010s. Like that captured the imagination of people, but it was mainly data scientists. It wasn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't a consumer facing app that you could do deep learning on. That wasn't like a thing. Like what would be the application? I guess, hot dog, not hot dog, maybe that app, but, you know, but but it wasn't like ChatGPT where if you show it to even my fifth grader, he uses it and he's just like, yeah, I get it immediately. Right. Like I use it all the time for him to help him with reading.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, give me a paragraph or two to read and give me some questions to test my reading comprehension.
Oh,
I
that's kind of
think,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I do
Yeah.
that with my kid, because so I think but he understands it immediately. He just interacts with it. There's like nothing to prompt him. He's just like, dun, 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 done.
Yeah. No. I'm glad you're using it. Sounds like in a positive way instead of like allowing. I mean, I don't know. Have you? It's hard not to like think about the impacts on human ability to reason and think when you see it, and when you use it yourself. Like when I use it myself, and I'm like, man, I could just throw this in ChatGPT and not think about something for a second,
Mhm.
and I will do that if I let myself do that,
Oh yeah.
because it's so easy. And I think I'm like, man, like what is the impact of this? I'm sure everyone thinks on that. Like what is the impact of having the ability to not think, essentially? um
Yeah. That's a whole that's a whole book.
Philosophical. Whole book. How goes the book writing?
It's going really good. I mean, this is a hard book to write. It's harder than fundamentals of data engineering, which is an absolute bear to write. Plus, I'm doing it on my own. That said, I think it's coming along well. The fact that I'm writing it, I think in public is actually a really good thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's coming along nice. I feel like could be more on track, but I think that's always the case. But it's fun. It's fun to write it.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because I feel like this book is really pushing data modeling into hopefully different directions than it's been discussed before, and that's always exciting. But it's always one of those things where you don't have any prior context in a lot of cases when you're writing a book like this. Like, there's nothing where you can say, "Oh, okay, so like, what should I write about next?" It's like, well, I don't know. What do you think you should write about? Because it's new material. This hasn't been done.
Yeah.
So it's like, so I think writing in public is actually good because you kind of see what lands, what needs work. So
Yeah.
it's one.
Yeah, that's one reason I think I was like, oh, I could just put out chapters in my book and see if people respond and see if people want to add to it or take away. I think.
What are you
um,
writing about?
I mean, for me, it's mostly on, how, like, the thing that the title that I'd like is something around the lines of like, don't lead a data team before reading this book, or something along those lines. And
Mm,
so it's really just, again, meant to help people as they're trying to figure out, again, like what value can I drive as a data leader. How do I do it, and then how do I manage a team, and how do I actually hire a team. I just put out, like, that was the chapter, or yeah, the half of the chapter I just put out was like, how do you hire a team? What
the
are you
Seattle
looking
data
for?
guy.
On the Substack, yeah. Oh, now I have to make sure you're
Oh, good
like both of
job.
you. Yes.
I see one on joins.
Oh,
That's
that
cool
that
though.
one's yeah. I've also been doing like a back to the basics. So basically, right now, my view is like, I the places I like helping, or the places I'm interested in helping, is on one side, I kind of going back to like the whole, as people rush for I want to kind of dig into talking about the basics again, and just like thinking about
Yeah,
that. That was something that I picked up when I worked in fine dining. It was kind of the same thing when I was 16. I was like, I want to do molecular gastronomy because that's what like modernist cuisine had just come out by Nathan Raval and his company. And everyone was doing foams and gels, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is the future of food. And I think I worked at a restaurant that did it for like 6 months, and I was like, this is like, I mean, there are places it belongs, but it's not food.
Yeah.
And so like that made me like turn back, and I was like, fuck this. I just want to do like basic shit really well. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the same idea here. It's like, look, I get that there's all this cool stuff going on, but if you don't have a fundamental understanding of what's going on, we're just going to end up in a really weird place in the future where like
Yeah.
somehow like, and I know there's a line of like how far abstraction should go, right? It's like how far, like, I don't understand necessarily down to the hardware. I'm not saying you have to do that deep, but I don't know, somewhere you need to understand some basics of programming. And I'm worried sometimes if we go too fast or too far on that abstraction kind of curve.
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing, am I just kind of outsourcing my thinking, right? If I'm using ChatGPT, yeah, I guess the answer is unequivocally yes. If you don't know what to look for, like what does good look like, what does bad look like, when we're talking about say code, like yeah, the caveat with these tools is you sort of need to understand, does the output seem believable?
Yeah.
If it does, great. If not, how would you know though?
Yeah.
Right? So it's a big one. That's cool though. Good for you for writing the book. And I think that's material. It's good material. I think it's timeless material. I think you'll do pretty well with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just realized, if I'm going to keep writing, I want to start making some bigger bets in that regard, right? Like, it's like, well, I shouldn't just write a newsletter, which is great, but there's something to be said about trying to collate what you have in your brain into like one piece. I assume. I mean, I assume that since you've written already one, but I think, it's harder because for many reasons it's harder, but one is like, you won't know if it's good until it's done, really. Even with people looking at it ahead of time, like, you won't know it's good until it's complete. And that part's hard, I think, is like,
It is hard. And the problem with a book, especially if you decide to print a physical copy, is like it's permanent. Like people have that now, and hopefully you gave it your best shot. Not just writing, but like editing it,
yeah,
formatting, everything about it, right? I mean, you can get face tattoos removed these days.
Yeah.
Books are a bit more permanent.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of also thinking about it. Yeah. So yeah, but it's been fun so far. I've got 2 chapters ish written. I'm
Nice.
slowly getting on the third. One of them being on projects, which is one reason I want to talk, because I was like, yeah, I'm trying to think about like projects, like how do we do projects that are meaningful, and not just, again, I think we fall into that trap of, oh yeah, let's just do a report because that's what we've always done. And then I just feel like you're accounting, right? And I think you might have said that somewhere. It's like you're just accounting that does accounting on everything and not just money. It's like, well, we do all accounting here.
Yeah.
And then,
That's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, is a report a project?
I mean, obviously, a report on itself is generally not a project unless maybe it's like a product or something of nature. Maybe like the data warehouse that supports all your reporting. It can be a project depending on, I imagine, what it's connected to. But I think oftentimes reports just end up being kind of some temp, or like, we needed this for this one specific problem. Again, Chili's turnaround. Well, in order to do Chili's turnaround, we want to reduce, or we want to shrink our menu. In order to figure out how to shrink our menu, we need to look at our past performance of different products, look at like their margins, look at how many people order them, and figure out what to keep and what not to keep. But after it's done, it's done.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a project, but it was definitely like a ethereal one. So
Right.
and it was just a piece of a project too. It was like, well, this was part of it. The bigger project is trying to figure out how to reduce the menu. So
Yeah, but then these artifacts sort of take on a life of their own.
Yeah.
And they become their own project. So it's like Gremlins.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's definitely something I've been trying to think on too, is like what projects are always like are worth it. I also like the idea again of like offensive defensive projects, because I was thinking about like what general categories do certain projects fit in? Like, let's say a migration. I think in most cases, a migration is kind of defensive, right? Like it's like I can at least tell my company I saved us money, right? Or maybe improved our speed to make more reports, which may or may not be something that adds huge value on the
But
whole.
if it's a migration though for a customer facing product where by making this migration we get more throughput, which
Yeah.
means we're able to handle whatever else that generates more money, like
Yeah.
that's the business is just say, yeah, like why aren't you working on that yesterday, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I would, yeah, if
Exactly.
I were the CEO and somebody said, yeah, we need to increase throughput to do this, but yeah, what do you want? Like, how much money do you want? But if you're telling me we need to do more throughput for these historical facing reports, right? Like I need to size up to a 6XL Snowflake instance to get you to these reports. I'm like, well, yeah, but why? Like, it's going to cost me more money. I might get it faster, but is it going to move the needle for my business and make my life better, and improve the customer experience? If you can
Yeah.
tell me yes, sure. But if not, I'm like, just stick with your extra small instance. It's fine. You don't need to size
Yeah,
it up.
I like that you said move the needle because I was one of the examples that I think I wrote down was the Dana from the UFC when he said Nate Diaz isn't a needle mover, and I was like, are
Yeah.
you Nate Diaz? Are you not a needle mover? Obviously, eventually he became a needle mover and got paid, but there is something about like actually moving the needle and doing more than just like I saved us $10,000, which is like, okay, but an engineer costs you 100. So, was
Yeah.
it worth it at the end of the day? And
Yeah.
that's
And the $10,000 saving, it also took you a month, you say, and your monthly salary is $10,000. Cool. It's a wash. Congratulations. It
yeah.
didn't do anything actually. Yeah. That's a good point. And Dana White gets a lot of crap, but I think he's a very good businessman.
Oh yeah.
Obviously,
I mean, you can't have a whatever. I don't know what his business is currently worth. I guess it was bought out, right? So whatever
yeah.
that chunk of the business is actually worth. I mean, yeah. It's just
Mhm.
it's a good line. I like that. I was like, well, that's kind of like that's what we should ask ourselves. Are we actually moving the needle? I think Shakar
Yeah.
also said something like that.
Yeah.
Where he was like, when he worked at Facebook, now I'm suddenly forgetting the VP of data engineering's name, and I should know it because his name was always dropped. It felt like everyone was dropping his name when he worked there. But he just referenced the fact that it's like, hey, you gave me like 10 projects that are like 10% projects. That's okay. I want like a 10x project, right? Like we need to do
Yeah.
3 projects that could possibly be 10x. And then if one of them hits, that's way better than like if 4 of your 10 projects improve me by 10%. So
And I think that's just it too, right? So if you're going to talk about like data teams and projects, those are the sorts of things where I think you're going to add the most value is that those things that are really good, not just going to move the needle, but it's like these are transformational things for the company.
yeah.
That's where you need to be putting your money, right? But if it's just to get reports, my whole thing is like, could you just do that in Excel, right?
Oh man, yeah.
And have somebody from Upwork just do it for you? I mean, honestly, if it's like leads to the same conclusion, if it's literally the same numbers, but it's like, yeah, it's an Excel, so what? I'd rather have that. I'd rather just pay probably some temp to do it versus because again, these aren't needle moving things. This is just how I know to calibrate where I am.
Yeah.
Right. I need to invest my money into, if I'm a capital allocator in a business, I need to allocate capital. Things are going to get the most return, not just things that are a nice, they're kind of tell me that I'm on track, right? Like it's like a clock, right? I mean, cool. Am I good? If me investing in a Hublot watch, is that going to provide a 10x return on my life? No, it gives me a fancier thing to look at the time with, right? My Apple Watch is actually still better because it's synced to the atomic clock. I'll give you an example. I was about to go buy a nice Breitling watch, a couple of years ago. Really, really expensive. I just sat there at the counter. I'm like, my Apple Watch actually has better time than this thing, though. Like, I was like, what am I going to do with it? Am I just going to look at it, right? And I understand, expensive pieces like that. It's more just meant to, you know, um, it's more of a signaling device and stuff. But at the end of the day, I was like, this is a complete waste of money.
Yeah.
But I view a lot of projects like that. Like, are you just buying a fancier watch,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or are you doing something that's going to completely transform your business? And to me, if you're in the business of capital allocation, which any executive and leader needs to be, you need to think of it not just as human resources, but about capital resources being deployed to drive the best return for your situation. That's how I view projects. Like, is this, and you're absolutely right, that VP deserves a gold medal. It's like, is this a 10x or is this a 10%?
Yeah.
I'm not interested in 10%. I can put my money in the bank and in treasuries and get 4 right now. But that's playing not to lose, right?
Yeah.
The 10x up is where you plan to win.
Yeah.
That's the whole difference.
Yeah, I kind of view it similarly to, there's a certain point, like if you're just thinking about yourself, right? If you're making $75,000 a year, at a certain point, cost cutting makes sense, right? Like trying to figure out how to save pennies, et cetera, and cost cutting makes sense. But at a certain point, it's like, look, you spending hours trying to cut coupons to save $500 a year, it'd be better for you to try to find a $25,000 increase in your job or something versus trying to save $500. That would be a bigger impact on your life, and it is kind of, I think, the same thing where it's like you're again going back to that migration. It's like, great, you saved this money, but like, again, you're just kind of, again, playing not to lose. You're just trying to save money. You're acting like a cost center.
Yep.
And so how do you expect me to treat you? Is kind of that end result. It's like, that's
Which
what
is
you
it.
are.
I mean, you can be both. You could be like Warren Buffett, who, is probably the best capital allocator in history, but he also goes to McDonald's and uses coupons. True.
No, I again, you can be both. That part is true, but I think it's just one of the things where, like, when you get overly fixated on either, and I think it's easier to get overly fixated on cost because it feels so easy to grasp, right? Like, it's something that I can somewhat control. Whereas again, the other side is I have to risk some level. There's some level of risk involved, and that's, I'm not guaranteed to get to the end result, but you have to be willing to do it.
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, welcome to the jungle. This is real life, right? Like, you get what you get out what you put in and what you risk, right? If you want to, so it's equivalent of like, yeah, I could have just invest my money in CDs and treasuries, and like, that's perfectly fine. Am I going to get rich off that? Probably not for hundreds of years.
No, nope.
Right. But so you're going to have to assume some level of risk taking, but that's the nature of business. So it's about, again, it's capital allocation is about assuming the risk. I remember Warren Buffett, he's always fond of saying at the shareholder meetings, like, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. That's an old Aesop fable.
Yeah.
But that's essentially how you have to evaluate the risk. Is what I have right now sufficient to risk what could be, over there? And I need to understand, okay, so what's in the bush? Like, what is it that versus what I have? Like, is it worth the cost to get it? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're better off staying where you are. That's the essence of risk evaluation, and that's. But if you're a manager, if you're a decision maker, like, that's literally your job. It's not just to put butts in seats and make sure you show up at the office. It's about saying, okay, so are we focused on the right stuff, given our constraints? That's literally how business works, right? So. But all too often, if you're in a cost center, you're just playing it safe. Like, you aren't thinking like that. You're not thinking like a killer. You're thinking how not to get killed. That's a different game.
That just makes you think of Succession. You're not a killer. I don't know if you ever watched it, but
I need to watch it, man. Everyone keeps telling me. I'm just like,
you're traveling. You don't have time. How many?
I love the on airplanes.
I'm curious if. Well, I guess you could watch it on the internet if you have HBO. I don't know if they have it on the plane, but this is another thing, is like, how many projects do you think, like, valuable projects do you think you can actually take on? Because again, thinking about that Chili's turnaround, my view is like, it's really just one big project, right? That has like multiple mini projects inside of it. Like, you have to improve marketing, you have to improve, or it's one big initiative, I guess, that then has projects inside of it. Like, how many things do you feel like a company can genuinely take on in like a year?
As few as possible.
Yeah.
You don't want to stretch yourself. I mean, everything's like 10 times harder than it looks. This. The successful projects I've seen is when you're just hyper focused on like the one or two things that's going to move like the needle for you, right? It's classic Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. So I'm a firm believer in that in my own life. Like, I don't take on a lot of stuff. I mean, it's to the point now, even with this book, like, I don't take meetings with people. Like, I just cut back as many distractions as I can. Because it's like, meetings, for example, most meetings don't need to happen. Those are emails. They should do it over email or a Loom. Loom's awesome. And the same thing applies to projects, right? Like what, given your constraints, which every business has, you have, you have limited money, you have limited time, limited staff. So, it becomes more of an optimization problem. Like, just how can we maximize what we have, right? And maximization also comes down to then choosing, okay, so like what opportunity is going to maximize our goals, right? But you got to focus on that. I think a lot of companies want to do a lot of stuff at once. I think that's kind of dumb. I've seen more companies get into trouble that way than anything else, where you actually overextend yourself versus just like focusing on like the one or two things and just getting like hyper good at that. Because I mean, that's how you build a defensible moat in the industry. Like you don't do that by being scattered on a million different things. Like how would you build a moat that way?
Yeah.
Right. You can't.
No, I think that's I mean, one, again, something I'm trying to do in my life. It's always hard. It's it's a discipline for sure to try to like remove opportunities, right? Because you have to say no, and it's hard. Like I imagine anyone who's out there is like, I want to learn. Like if you're in a learning stage in your life, I want to learn Snowflake. I want to learn, whatever Databricks. I want to learn all these tools. And it's like, well, honestly, if you just learn one of them at a time, you'd probably be more effective. And maybe you can kind of layer them. Sure, maybe there's some tools you can layer, but overall, it's like if you learn one, it'll probably be more effective. If you invest time in one space versus 10, one of those, it'll probably be better for you. But it's hard.
Like I'm learning photography right now, right? And I think that's interesting. I've actually forced myself to just, I have a classic thing, bought different types of lenses, and like the one I use the most, the one I try and force myself to use is just a simple 35 millimeter prime lens. It's only 35 millimeter, because then you force yourself to really understand the composition of the thing you're trying to photograph and the color and everything else. Versus if you just had like the fanciest lens in the world, which I also have, you can cheat, right? I really focus on just like get the fundamentals down. So
you can ChatGPT your photograph, so to speak. You can just have something basically do the work for you. I still don't know if this was a joke. Actually, like just back on that, like cheating. I had someone on one of the lives I did recently bring up the fact that they got a job as like an AWS data engineer via kind of ChatGPT and like using that to pass the certificate and then using that to kind of get a job. And I was just like, and now they don't really know what to do. And I'm like, one, I don't know if you're trolling me. Like, I don't know if you're just trying to like joke, but if that actually happened, that's like my actual concern. It's like, we're just going to end up in a place where we don't know anything. We just ask ChatGPT, like, how do I do this thing? And then
it very well could be the case, right? But I mean, I think you'd be mortified if you hired that person. You're like, oh my God, this person's a complete dolt. They literally don't know anything. It'd be a pretty quick job for them. Very, very swiftly. But like the certificate thing is interesting, right? So somebody, I think it's Adam Shorka, asked on LinkedIn today, like, what's the value of AWS and Azure certificates? And I was like, for me at least, if I see somebody with those, and I've taken those certs, not Azure, but AWS and GCP, many, many certs there, and it felt like those exams are hard enough where if you can pass them, and you have real world experience, like I feel like I don't need to really ask you as many questions because those tests do a very good job at diagnosing you. I don't know if you've taken them as well, but they're
I have not, but I do know that they are difficult. I just
pro
one of
level
the things
ones,
I always had projects, so I was like, well, I have projects, so I don't need to.
It's fine. If you're doing like partnerships with like these companies, they'll make you get the certs, and it's like, but especially when you get into the pro level or specialty level certs, like if you could chat GPT your way through that would be interesting. Like those are hard. Like they're real hard. But if I see somebody with them, then I'm like, I know that at least you know. But now it's interesting. Like, but this was all pre-chat GPT. Now it's, we were talking to somebody last night at our meetup, and I thought that was interesting. So this guy was like saying he's getting resumes. He's getting fake resumes for fake people that were written by LLMs.
That's hilarious.
With like fake LinkedIn profiles.
I'm curious if like the idea is, I wonder what the idea is there, because you eventually have to show your face. Because I'm like, oh, maybe you get hired and then you just like take the paycheck for a few months and then you leave, but like that you'd have to interview eventually face to face. So how do you handle that part? Because that'd be hilarious if like someone figure out a way to create a bot that basically just got a bunch of jobs and then just took their paychecks and like just did just enough work to not get fired. Like somehow used LLM to do just enough work to not get fired.
I mean, you joke, but I think that's going to be a thing. Like it probably already is. There's probably like it's like these bot employees that don't exist, collecting paychecks and so forth. It's yeah. Interesting. Well, new business idea for the audience.
New business idea, concerning business idea, but who knows? Maybe it'll
Well,
work.
because I told the guys, like, you realize you're in a data engineering meetup and you're looking for data engineers. Like, this is where I'd be looking right now.
Yeah.
More in person. But yeah, it's interesting.
It's fun.
I think you're right though, Ben. Like the sheer amount of just like BS out there is going to be just people like just BSing their way through everything. It's if you think it's bad now, like it's gonna be nuts.
I think you posted that recently. I think we're living through like the peak form of human content or something right now.
It was kind of a joke, actually. It was like a very satirical thing. But there was a nugget of truth in that where I felt like if you're doing human stuff, like you actually have a chance of standing out more than ever.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Because it's AI generated gruff, but it was also a kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Like, yeah, it's like so glad everyone's really creative and really expressing their humanity through ChatGPT. So, because you can see it on LinkedIn, I'm sure you get comments from people, and you're just like, looks like a bot wrote that.
Yeah, it's like it's very generic. We have 3 minutes, so I do want to be mindful of time. So, guys, for questions, I'll probably have to do questions tomorrow, but so I'll do another live. But just on this topic, okay, all right, okay. The one I'll take. Where was this? Oh, here. Let's do this one then. How can data teams balance working on business-driven projects versus more experimental or future projects? What do you think?
I think this is a false dichotomy. I think that depends on what you're trying to do, but I think that the dichotomy I'm pointing out is that any project is in some sense experimental or futuristic, like it hasn't been done yet. So I think it's more of a question of framing it like, how are you dealing with projects of great uncertainty, or are you dealing with projects where the certainty is pretty much baked in, right? That's more of how I view it. But I think every project should be business driven.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, I'll give you an example, right? If unless you're Google and have the budget to spend on, like, I don't even know what the hell they spend their money on. X was their whole lab thing they did for a long time, not the social media company. But I would say like I'd more frame it like how, like any project, in my opinion, should at least be tangentially or directly tied to the business. I don't think that we're going to go out, like, I'm not going to go out there and like do some experiment on like, molecular food, right? Like coming up with some like space splooge that's like awesome for cakes or something. Like that's not what I do. I would have no business doing that, right? But that would be considered experimental or futuristic projects. So I think it's more of like the continuum of certainty versus uncertainty, and more of like, if we do this uncertain thing and it pays off, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Right. Like what Elon did with the rockets, like the giant chopstick thing, like that's pretty badass, right? But the value of that is now like, don't have to go, for a lot of reasons, don't go salvage a booster. You can refuel it immediately. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
So
no, I like that answer. I do need to jump off though, sadly, but I appreciate this, Joe. No, you're good. I can no rush. I appreciate your time. I really do. This was fun. I want to say thank you, and thank you for everyone for watching. Joe, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just have to have you on a live show at some point too. So we just have a conversation when we do podcasts. It's about how this goes.
Exactly. So. No, I love it. We will have to do that. Awesome.
Cool.
I'm gonna hit end stream.